Mom believed my manipulative ex's lies about me cheating, disowned me, then begged for forgiveness after learning the truth. I was raised by my single mom after my dad passed away when I was just 2 years old. My entire life, I poured myself into my career, and my mom supported me wholeheartedly in doing that. But everything shifted when I was 20 and met my ex-girlfriend. At first, we were just colleagues, but she told me she'd soon be working in another sector. Once she started at her new workplace, she met another man and, in a cruel twist, fell in love with him while still in a relationship with me. I only found out what was happening because, after a supposed girls' night with her friends, she came to me herself and admitted she had slept with him. Shocked and betrayed, I broke up with her on the spot and told her to leave. For hours after, I sat alone, struggling to even comprehend the reality of what she'd done to me. That's when my mom called. She was furious, screaming at me over the phone, saying she hadn't raised me like this. Her words cut through me, and I was confused, asking her what on earth she was talking about. And then the truth punched me in the gut. My ex-girlfriend had spun a story to my mom, accusing me of cheating on her and claiming she had proof on my phone. I was stunned. I tried to explain to my mom that it was the complete opposite. My ex-girlfriend had been unfaithful, not me, but my mom refused to believe me, swayed by her affection for my ex. Until that day, I had always loved how close the two of them had become. It never bothered me before. But now I was paying the price for their bond. My mother called me a liar. She threatened to disinherit me from her will, saying she refused to have a cheater for a son and never wanted to see me again. It didn't end there. Later, my grandparents called to express just how disappointed they were in me, piling shame on top of heartbreak, telling me I deserved whatever bad things might come my way. And as if all that wasn't enough, I discovered my cheating ex-girlfriend continued to see my mom, acting like nothing had happened. The pain was indescribable. The only person who stood by me was my best friend. He was furious on my behalf, and I broke down sobbing in his arms. I know some people think it's strange for two guys to have that kind of moment, but his support was life-saving for me. A year went by. What happened had scarred me, but I had started to piece myself back together. Then, one day, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, there stood my mom, eyes brimming with tears. Seeing her brought all my emotions bubbling to the surface. I slammed the door, broke down crying, and shouted through my tears, demanding to know what the hell she wanted. She just stood outside my door, begging for 15 minutes straight for me to let her in so we could talk. Finally, I gave in. She stepped inside, and with trembling words, told me through her sobs that my ex had finally confessed, drunkenly, but admitted it all. My mom apologized over and over, telling me she knew she'd failed as a mother for not believing her own son. I accepted her apology, told her I didn't want to see her now, that I probably could never forgive her. Even as she pleaded for forgiveness, I couldn't bring myself to give it, not then. Over the following months, she started calling me every day, just to hear my voice. She always sounded so pained, telling me how much she missed me, how deeply she regretted not believing me, always ending the call with "I love you," and begging for a chance to see me. She confessed repeatedly that she couldn't go on thinking I might hate her, even if she'd understand if I did. But I don't hate her. She's still my mom, I still love her. But the trust we had is shattered. How can I ever trust her again? If I got into another relationship, who's to say she wouldn't believe that person's word over mine again? I appreciate her efforts to make amends, I really do, but I just can't forgive her. Not yet. I need my time. I hope she's able to understand that. Update 1. I texted her to come over, and she didn't hesitate for a second. She showed up at my front door in less than 15 minutes. I've been mulling over everything I wanted to ask, everything I needed to know, especially since, despite her repeated calls, we'd rarely had any real conversations. When she arrived, I sat her down in the living room. It was time to get answers. First, I asked about my grandparents. What had she told them? Was I still in her will? And was she still in touch with my ex? She explained she had told my grandparents what happened and expected they would call me, but apparently, their pride or stubbornness held them back. As for the will, I was back in it. Then she launched into a rant about my ex. According to her, when she found out what my ex had done, she was so furious she'd punched her so hard my ex lost a few teeth. Honestly, I doubt that detail is true, but for a split second, it was a strangely satisfying thing to imagine. She said she'd told her to FCK off and threw her out of the house. After that, all her bravado melted away, replaced by a wave of apologies. She told me over and over that she knew how badly she'd hurt me, how much she'd messed up, and that she understood if I could never trust her again. But she was desperate to fix things, to do everything in her power to make this right. She went into her own past, explaining that the man before my father had cheated on her and that infidelity had become a raw, sensitive subject. She admitted she deeply regretted not believing me, not even trying to hear my side of the story. While she poured her heart out, I just sat there listening, feeling detached. Eventually, I asked her the question that had been burning in my mind. How could I possibly trust her now? If something like this happened again, would she just cut me out of her life once more? She promised I had her word, but I shot back that her word didn't mean anything to me anymore. How could I trust her at all? She had no real answer, Just another round of pleading for forgiveness. I told her flat out that I couldn't forgive her, not now and maybe not ever. But I did see her efforts, and if she truly wanted me back in her life, she'd have to show, not just say, that I could rely on her. That hit her hard. Tears welled up in her eyes. She'd been holding them back the whole time, but then she completely broke down, sobbing right there on my floor. In a shaky, broken voice she asked if she could at least give me a hug. I let her. She held on to me, repeating that she would do anything to make this right, then left. Now, here's where it gets strange. What worries me most isn't her regret, but my own reaction. Watching my own mother on the floor crying, I felt nothing. I wasn't sad, I wasn't angry, not even happy. No spark of empathy, not even a flicker of emotion crossed my mind. A whole year went by without contact, and during that time, I stubbornly refused to go to therapy. Now, I have to wonder what's left between us, and what's left inside me. Update 2. After everything that happened, I decided to go to therapy, and I genuinely feel so much better now. Of course, that doesn't mean I've forgotten what happened to me. Those memories stick around. But honestly, I have to admit, my mom has made some real changes. She has really put in the work to improve herself. Just last month, when I moved into my new apartment, I asked her for help. Even though the move fell on a day where she had important appointments at her job, she immediately said yes. She canceled her plans just to be there for me. Now, she calls me almost every single day just to check in, to see how I'm doing. Sometimes she even shows up at my workplace to drop off a bit of lunch, or she visits me at home because, as she says, she just wants to hear my voice. Even with all of that, I have to admit I still can't fully trust her. I'm still in therapy, and, honestly, I have doubts that I ever will be able to trust her completely again. But I do see how hard she's trying to make things right. She took it a step further with my grandparents too. She reached out to them, talked things through, and demanded that they apologize to me. But, honestly, I couldn't care less about them. Even after the truth came out, nothing really changed. They're still just as difficult and unpleasant as before. Some people might be wondering whatever happened with my ex. The most recent thing I heard, through the grapevine of my best friend's friends, is that the guy she cheated on me with went ahead and cheated on her as well. Apparently, he only saw her as a fling. Whether that's true or not, I couldn't tell you for sure because it's all hearsay, and I absolutely don't care about her anymore. But I have to admit, if it were true, it would be some poetic karma. Thank you so much for your support throughout all of this. Update 3. Today was a big day for me, and I can only hope that I did the right thing. My mom has been visiting me almost every day after work, telling me stories about her day and always making sure to ask me about mine. Each time she's here, she checks on me, asks if I'm okay, and wonders if there's anything more she can do. Today, though, felt different. We genuinely had a good time together. We watched a movie, she cooked a meal just for me, and for the first time in a long while, it was wonderful. I can't deny it. Every evening when she would leave, she always hugged me goodbye, but I never hugged her back. I was still guarded. But today, when she wrapped her arms around me, I finally hugged her back. I told her that I forgive her. My heart was pounding so hard and fast as those words stumbled out of my mouth. Honestly, it took everything in me to say it, because I honestly had no clue how she'd react. A few months ago, I couldn't even have pictured saying something like that. Her face showed pure shock at first, and then, as if someone flipped a switch, she broke down sobbing in my arms, thanking me over and over. I was honestly at a loss, not really sure what to do as she clung to me. Through her tears, she kept saying how much she loves me, how proud she is to call me her son, insisting that not everyone would have been able to forgive her after the huge mistake she'd made. She went on about how awful she felt for ever having thought I could be a cheater, and she swore she would always be there for me, vowing to call me tomorrow. The entire moment felt so surreal, like I was living out a scene from a drama film, but strangely, I'm okay with that. She made a terrible mistake, there's no denying it. But I just couldn't keep holding on to this unforgiveness forever, especially after all the effort she's put into patching things up between us. Maybe this isn't the kind of resolution some people would hope for, but honestly, I feel good about it, and that's what really matters. Update 4. I stood in my kitchen, staring at that paper, and for the first time in a long time, my first instinct wasn't to shut down. I called my mom. She picked up immediately. I didn't even get through the first sentence before she said, "I'm coming," and hung up. 10 minutes later she was at my door with her coat half on, keys in her hand, cheeks flushed like she'd sprinted the last block. She didn't ask me how I could have been so careless. She didn't ask anything. She just said, "We'll handle it." We sat in a lawyer's office that afternoon under yellow lights and stale coffee smell, listening to a calm man with wire-rimmed glasses explain swabs and court dates. I kept waiting for the floor to tilt under me. It didn't. My mom sat beside me, shoulder pressed to mine, and every time my knee started bouncing she placed her hand over it and I felt my whole body settle like someone turned down the volume on the panic. The text started that night from an unknown number. "You know it's yours. Be a man. Your mom said you'd do the right thing." I showed my mom and she laughed once, a sharp, humorless sound. "Text back that everything goes through the lawyer," she said. "Don't give her anything to twist." She wasn't just saying it. She was there, In my kitchen, making a list of appointments on a sticky note she slapped onto my fridge. When my grandparents called and launched into that old disappointed tone, my mom took my phone and said, "He is doing everything right. If you want to be part of this, you can start by not making it harder." Then she hung up. My mom, the peacemaker who used to beg me to be the bigger person, just hung up on her own parents for me. The clinic smelled faintly like antiseptic and peppermint gum. I watched a nurse swab the inside of my cheek and drop it into a little tube like it was the most boring thing in the world. My ex showed up for her appointment an hour after mine with some guy I'd never seen before hovering near the door. She looked me up and down like we were in line at a grocery store and said, "You know, you could just save us all time and sign." I didn't answer. My mom stepped forward so fast I almost missed it and said, very quietly, "Leave my son alone." My ex rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath and I felt the old anger flash up, but it moved through me. It didn't stick. When they called her name and she walked past us, I didn't feel small. I just felt done. 2 weeks later we were in a courtroom with a broken clock and a judge who didn't look up often. I could hear the shuffle of papers and the low hum of someone's phone vibrating in a bag. When the clerk read the result, it was 2 numbers spoken like weather. 0.00%. No probability of paternity. Case dismissed. There was a sharp sound to my right like someone had dropped a pen. My ex's mouth fell open and then she snapped it shut and started talking about dates and how this test must be wrong, but the judge held up a hand and told her the matter was settled. He ordered her to pay costs. She went still like a statue, eyes shining with anger, then spun on her heel and walked out. The guy with her didn't follow right away. He looked at me, then at my mom, and for a second he seemed like he might say something. He didn't. Outside the building, the October wind cut through my jacket. My mom stood with me on the steps and I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from relief. She didn't give me a speech. She just pulled me in and hugged me right there in front of strangers and said into my ear, "I'm proud of you." We were walking toward the parking lot when I heard my ex's voice bounce off concrete. She was by a car with that same guy, jabbing her finger into his chest. He had a baby carrier on the ground next to him and I swear my heart fell into my shoes. I didn't go closer. I didn't want to see the baby. The guy finally bent, picked up the carrier, and for half a second, as he straightened, he looked at me across the distance and mouthed sorry. Then they got into the car and drove away, and the wind took whatever sound was left. I thought that was the end, but that night my grandparents called again. This time, my granddad's voice was small. He said, "We were wrong. No excuses. No sermon. Just that." I told him I heard him. I told him I needed time. He said okay. My mom slept on my couch that night because she said she didn't trust herself not to call me every 10 minutes to ask if I was okay. In the morning, she made eggs and coffee and kept fussing with the sugar jar like it was a bomb she needed to defuse. I sat at the table and watched her and knew something I hadn't been sure of for a long time. I do trust her. Not because she said the right things. Because when it mattered, she picked up the phone, got in her car, and stood next to me without blinking. Therapy didn't give me some dramatic epiphany. It gave me the ability to sit in that courtroom and not cave. It gave me the ability to walk past an old life and not let it drag me back in. And it gave me the space to let my mom back in, too, and let her prove it wasn't just words. Update 5. I went on a date. That sentence feels like a bigger deal than it should, but it was. Small place with plants hanging from the ceiling and a chalkboard menu with handwriting so pretty it almost felt fake. She was funny in a way that didn't demand attention, and I could feel my shoulders dropping inch by inch. I ordered a pasta that came out with a curl of steam and basil stuck to the rim of the plate. My phone stayed face down and for once I didn't care. Then the door opened, and the air shifted like the room took a breath it had been holding. I didn't need to look to know. You know how you can recognize a song from the first note? It was like that, but with a person I never wanted to hear again. She walked straight to our table like she'd been invited and said my name loud enough that people turned their heads. My date looked at me, eyes wide. I felt heat in my face, but it wasn't panic. It was something flatter, colder. "You're really going to pretend like you don't owe me a conversation?" she said. There it was. The performance. The guy from the clinic was nowhere in sight. New purse, same tone. I said, evenly, "You need to leave." She laughed, one sharp sound. "Does she know you were almost paying for my baby?" She tried to catch my date's eye, tried to fold her into the drama like it was a group project. My date didn't take it. She just put her fork down and touched my wrist under the table. The manager appeared like he'd been summoned by the word baby and asked if everything was okay. I kept my voice steady and said, "I'm asking her to leave me alone." The manager turned to my ex and told her she had to go. She didn't move. She leaned in and hissed, "You think you're safe? I'm not letting you smear me like this." It was almost funny. "You lied to a judge," I said. "We're done." The manager gestured to the door and when she still didn't budge, he called someone in the back and a security guard came out. Big guy, polite, who walked her out while she kept talking in a voice that kept trying to hook into me. The door closed behind her and the room went quiet and then it wasn't quiet anymore, like someone hit play, again. I stared at the basil on the plate and realized my hands weren't shaking. My date exhaled and said, softly, "Do you want to leave?" I did. We boxed the food, paid, walked into air that smelled like wet pavement. She touched my arm again and said, "I believe you." I didn't realize I'd been bracing for the other shoe until she said that, and I could feel everything in me unclench a notch. I called my mom on the sidewalk, because the old me would have locked the feeling down and pretended it didn't matter, and the new me didn't. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what happened and she went quiet in that way where you can hear someone choosing not to swear on your behalf. "Send me the restaurant's number," she said. "I'll make sure they have a note if she tries that again." It wasn't dramatic. It was practical. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She said, "I'm 2 blocks away," and hung up. 10 minutes later she hugged me under a streetlight and told my date, "He's a good one," like she was offering a character reference at a job interview. My date laughed. I laughed too. It felt weird and human and light. I thought that was the whole story until a message hit my email the next morning with a subject line that made my stomach drop. "Mark, coffee?" I had to go back and look at his face in my memory to match a name to it. The guy from the courthouse. He kept it short. He said he was sorry for what happened at the restaurant and he didn't know if I'd even read the email, but he was filing for custody and he could use any proof I had that she'd lied. He said he wasn't trying to drag me into anything. He just didn't know what else to do. He added one thing at the end: "I found your email on the public records from the case. Please don't be mad." I showed my mom. She read it without commentary and then looked at me. "Do you want to help him?" It was the way she asked, not assuming, not pushing, just putting the decision in my hands and trusting me to hold it. We met in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt sugar and espresso. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. There was a car seat by his feet with a blanket tucked over it, tiny and undeniably real. I felt something like a wind move through my chest. He stood up when I walked in like I was the person who could make his life easier, and I hated that. For both of us. He didn't go for the sob story. He just laid it out. She'd told him I was violent. She'd told him I was stalking her. She'd told him I yelled at her in a clinic waiting room. He said he had texts now from a number he didn't recognize saying he'd regret it if he didn't sign the birth certificate, and when he traced it, it belonged to one of her friends. He didn't ask for my sympathy. He asked if I had the messages where she told me to be a man, or the timeline from the test. I said I did. He asked if I could send them to his lawyer. I told him I'd have my lawyer send them. He nodded, like the idea of a chain between us made it safer. The blanket in the car seat twitched. A little hand popped out and grabbed air like a starfish. I didn't look under the blanket, but I stood there and let the reality of that hand settle the last of my anger into something heavier. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired of being a prop in her show. Helping him wasn't for her, or for me. It was for a kid who deserved to grow up without this mess choking her whole life. Court again. Different room, same battered benches. The judge was a woman this time with hair pulled back so tight I thought about headaches. My mom sat behind me and put a peppermint in my palm like I was a kid before a dentist appointment. I didn't even want it. I held it anyway. Her lawyer tried to paint Mark as unstable. Mine didn't say much. He didn't have to. Screenshots, timestamps, the lab result, my mom testified. She didn't dramatize. She said, clearly, that my ex had admitted to her face that she'd lied. She said she had told her to leave me alone, and she had seen her continue to harass me. She said she was ashamed she ever gave my ex oxygen in my life, and that she was there because she refused to let that continue. The judge watched her with that expression judges wear when they're deciding if you're a person or a performance. When my mom finished, the judge thanked her in that exact tone, formal, even. I felt an odd pride. Not because she was defending me. Because she was choosing to put herself on the record with her name and her face and the worst thing she'd done as a mother, and she didn't flinch. The judge gave Mark temporary primary custody and set a review date 3 months out. She ordered a parenting class, a social worker visit, and told my ex if another false paternity claim showed up in her name, she'd be looking at sanctions. My ex went still and then bright red, like someone had plugged her in. She stood up too fast and knocked her chair over and it clanged against the table leg. The bailiff said, "Ma'am," in a way that was a warning. She didn't look at me. She looked right past me like I was a smudge on glass and said, "This is not over," and then she marched out. The door swung shut behind her and left us with the sound of paper being filed. On the steps outside, Mark cried the quiet kind of cry where nothing moves except your eyes. He shook my hand and then he shook my mom's hand like she was also his mom for a second. He said, "Thank you," in a voice that sounded like someone stepping onto solid ground after months at sea. He lifted the car seat like it weighed nothing and walked away. I thought that would be the coda, but life is weird. There was a package on my doormat that night with my grandfather's handwriting on it. No return address, just my name and the street written in his careful, old man printing. I carried it to the kitchen and cut the tape with a butter knife, and inside was a wooden box that smelled like cedar and engine oil. There was a watch nestled in a square of flannel and a folded letter. The watch was heavy and scratched at the edges. My dad's initials were engraved so lightly I had to tilt it to catch them. My mom walked in as I was holding it and she stopped like she'd been shot. She put her hand over her mouth and then she reached out and touched the face of the watch with just one finger like it was hot. The letter was 1 page. My granddad wrote that the watch had been my dad's, and then his, and it never made it to me because in the chaos of losing a son they turned all their love sideways and it came out as control. He wrote that he didn't know how to fix what they'd done, but he knew this was where the watch belonged. He asked me to come by when I felt ready. He wrote, at the bottom, in shaky letters, "We love you. No conditions." I didn't know what to do with that. I put the watch on. It was too big and too loose and it felt like wearing time that didn't belong to me yet. My mom sat down and cried in a way that was almost silent, tears running straight down like lines on a face in a painting. I put my arm around her and we sat there like that with the watch ticking on my wrist and the refrigerator humming and everything feeling both smaller and bigger than it had that morning. Before she left that night, my mom stood in the doorway and said, "I know what my word meant to you before. I know why it didn't anymore. I want you to know that today, if your word and hers ever collide again, I will take yours. Every time." It wasn't a speech. It was a fact. It landed in me and settled. Not as fireworks. As a foundation. I went to sleep with the watch on. I woke up with an imprint of the metal on my skin and a text from my date that just said, "Pasta, take 2?" And a photo of a basil plant in her kitchen with a caption that read, "I promise it's safe here." I smiled at my phone like an idiot. I put the kettle on. The day started. For the first time in a long time, the next thing didn't feel like a cliff. It felt like a road. Update 6. Pasta, take 2 turned into me standing in a tiny kitchen with a basil plant on the windowsill and a cat that kept pretending not to care about me while it blinked like an old man. She handed me a wooden spoon and said, "Stir," like she'd known me for years. I watched steam fog the glass and felt the oddest thing. Nothing in me was braced. My phone buzzed once, unknown number, and I flipped it over and let it buzz itself out. She smiled at me like that was an answer she agreed with. We ate on the couch with our knees almost touching. At some point the cat decided I had earned a single, reluctant permission to exist and curled up against my thigh. When we finished, she put the empty bowls in the sink and I said, "My mom wants to make you dinner," before I could overthink it. She looked surprised in a way that wasn't afraid. "Okay," she said. "If she promises not to interview me like a detective." I told her my mom would turn up with a casserole and 3 backup casseroles and then apologize for not bringing enough. She laughed. I kissed her in that little pocket of laughter. It felt like stepping onto a deck that didn't sway. The watch has become a habit. I keep catching myself checking it when there's no reason to, like I'm listening for something under the ticking. A jeweler resized it for me the next day, tiny shop, velvet trays, a bell on the door that made the kind of sound you hear in movies. He took the back off to look at the mechanism and stopped. "You know there's an inscription inside?" he said, like he was handing me the end of a thread. He flipped the case and held it toward me and there, so small I had to lean in, were words scratched into the metal that weren't the initials I'd already seen. "For L, so he'll know time was my favorite thing to spend with you both." I didn't move. The jeweler pretended to fuss with a cloth and gave me the kind of space only people who have seen a lot of rings and watches and faces know how to give. I bought him out of his impulse buys, keychain, polished cloth, a tiny box I didn't need, because I couldn't think of another way to stand upright. I drove straight to my mom's. She opened the door with a dish towel over her shoulder like a sitcom mom and I handed her the watch without saying anything. She read it once, then again, the way your eyes do when your brain won't catch. She sat down hard on a kitchen chair. "He never showed me this," she said, voice thin. "He didn't have time." She put her fingertip on the word time and then took a breath that shuddered. "Okay," she said after a minute, like she was talking herself down from the edge of something. "Okay. I have something too." She went to the hall closet and came back with a box that looked like an old pair of shoes should have lived inside it. "I wasn't ready," she said, like an apology to the air. "I am now." Inside were cassettes, VHS, thick as bricks, with dates written in my grandfather's careful printing, and once in my dad's messier scrawl. My first birthday. A Christmas where someone had definitely overdone it on the lights. My dad in a backyard wearing a shirt with a stain on the pocket that looked like he'd tried to wash it out right before someone pointed a camera at him. We didn't have a VCR. My mom called the neighbor like it was a fire and 10 minutes later we were on the floor of our living room with a borrowed player humming and the screen flickering like a time machine. There I was, bald and furious at a balloon. There he was, younger than me, hair too long, saying my name in a voice I recognized and didn't. He kept reaching off screen like the camera was wherever my mom was standing, and making the baby me laugh like that was the only job he'd ever wanted. At one point the shot went crooked and you could see my mom's legs and hear her say, "You're not getting his nose right," and my dad said, "He thinks I'm hilarious," and I did. For a second my living room and that sunlit backyard were the same place and the watch on my wrist felt warm from more than my skin. We watched 3 tapes without speaking. The neighbor knocked once to ask if we needed anything. My mom said no, just oxygen, and laughed and wiped her face with her sleeve. I took the box home. I didn't plan to. I just found myself putting it in my backseat like you buckle a kid in without thinking. That night I texted my grandparents and told them I wanted to come by. Their house smelled like lemon oil and a kind of clean that doesn't come from new things, but from old things kept carefully. My grandmother's hands were smaller than I remembered. My grandfather looked like someone had taken the air out of the person he used to be and left the shape. He put his palm on the watch without picking it up, like he was checking that it was real. He wore it on his wedding day, he said. It was too big then, too. He said he'd grow into it. My grandmother touched my hair the way she used to when I was 10 and trying to be taller than everyone. You have his annoyed face, she said, which for her was affection and apology in the same sentence. We sat. No speeches. My grandfather said, we were afraid, and then he said, we confused fear with righteousness, like he'd been practicing the line in his head and wanted to get it right. My grandmother said, we drove over to your apartment twice and didn't get out of the car, and her mouth did that thing where it tries to fold down the corners to keep the cry inside. I told them, I heard the words, about the letter, and I meant it. I told them I needed them to stop talking like narrators at a church pageant and start talking like people. My grandmother snorted and said, you are your mother's son, and then she cried for real. They brought out photo albums like a parade. One of them had a picture of my mom at 20, laughing with her mouth open, hand on my dad's shoulder, head thrown back. She looked like the person I've been seeing again lately, the one who shows up with soup and dumb jokes and peppermint candies. My grandfather said, we owe her an apology too. So I texted my mom and said, come if you want. She wrote back, I'm already in the car, and she was. She stood in their doorway with that careful politeness she puts on when she's walking into a room she doesn't trust, and my grandmother stepped forward and said, we were cruel, and my mom put her hand to her own chest and said, so was I, and then no one was careful anymore. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't a hug and a fade to music. It was old people and my mother and me all talking over each other and stopping and trying again. Eventually we sat. My grandma made tea that tasted like boiled forgiveness. When my mom left, my grandfather hugged her like he was sure she might vanish if he didn't hold on. That should have been enough emotional cardio for a week, but the universe apparently likes a double feature. My lawyer called and said the judge had signed a temporary restraining order and service would happen by Friday. Her posts, he said, like a weather report, calling you dangerous in a public forum after a court found otherwise? That's not protected. I didn't go looking for the posts, but Mark sent me a link anyway along with a message that was just, I'm sorry. She's spiraling. He included a photo of his daughter staring at the camera like she was trying to memorize it. Her hand was still a starfish. There was a tiny knitted hat with a pom-pom. I saved the photo and texted back, you're doing fine. I don't know if he is. It felt like the thing people told me that made me feel like I might be. Service happened in the least cinematic way possible. A guy in a windbreaker rang her bell and handed her a stack of papers and she crumpled one and threw it at his feet like that changed physics. She called me twice from different numbers and left voicemails that started sweet and ended sharp. I didn't pick up. My mom sent me a screenshot that said, blocked, and added nothing, which I appreciated more than any speech. Dinner at my mom's with my date was a slow entrance ramp. My mom wore an apron she'd ironed. My date brought a plant because she said flowers die and she doesn't like starting relationships with metaphors like that. My mom laughed in a way that was genuine, not performative, and then they got into a conversation about whether cilantro tastes like soap and I realized I was the least interesting person at my own table. It was perfect. After dessert, my mom disappeared into the kitchen and I could hear her on the phone saying, no, not tonight, Dad, in the tone of a woman who had decided where her evening would begin and end. She came back and pretended she hadn't made a boundary like it was no big deal. It was the biggest deal. On Tuesday my boss called me into his office and said the words, lead on the account, and I had that out-of-body thing where you watch yourself nod and say, I'd be honored, while your stomach takes an elevator down 3 floors. I walked outside and called my mom because apparently that's my favorite new hobby. She said, do you want me to bring you lunch or a fire extinguisher? I told her both. She showed up with sandwiches and a cheap red extinguisher from the hardware store and set it next to my desk like a mascot. My coworkers came by to meet the extinguisher and my mother. She shook hands like she was running for office and then whispered to me, you can move this after I leave. I know it's ridiculous, and I didn't move it. It's still there. It makes me laugh. It makes other people laugh. When I look at it, I think, I'm allowed to have things that are both funny and functional and also evidence that the people who love me show up. The night the order went active, I slept for 9 hours and woke up not like I'd outrun a bear, but like I'd walked out of a loud room. My phone had a message from Mark that said, she didn't come to the exchange. The supervisor wrote her up. Thank you for the record. And one from my grandfather that said, any chance I could stop by and help you hang a shelf? He has never asked to help me with anything in his life. We put up a shelf crooked and then straight and he told me a story about my dad failing his driving test the first time because he forgot to check his mirror. He was always looking forward, my grandfather said. We thought it meant he didn't value where he'd been. We were wrong. He touched the watch again. You look like yourself, he said, which I decided to take as the highest possible compliment. At some point I'll go back and watch the rest of the tapes. I'll probably cry at something weird, like the way my dad flicked water at my mom while she was washing dishes and she pretended to be mad. For now, I'm making coffee in the morning and answering emails and saying yes to dinner that isn't a test. My mom keeps sending me pictures of recipes with too much. In the caption, my date kissed me on my sidewalk and said, you have people, like it was a thing she liked about me, not something to edge away from. The watch ticks. The basil on her windowsill is still alive. The extinguisher is ridiculous. I'm not waiting for the floor to tilt. I'm just walking across it.